The sky above the frozen world was dark like a giant shadow had fallen over it. Thick clouds moved slow and heavy, blocking out any light, and the air was full of snow that spun in circles as if the wind wanted to tear the world apart. The alien ship hung in that sky like a black mountain of metal, its sharp edges cutting through the white storm, engines humming low like a predator ready to strike. And from its open bays came long drops of light that fell to the ground far below. Inside each light was a cage, and in each cage a prisoner. They came from many planets, each one known for dangerous skills or strange abilities. Some had claws sharp enough to cut steel, some had skin like rock, some could run faster than most ships could fly in a straight line on the ground. And among them there was one human, small compared to the others, wearing only a thin coat that hung loose around his shoulders, his face half hidden under the hood, and his eyes looking out not at the hunters above, but at the storm ahead. The cages hit the snow with heavy thuds, doors bursting open, and the prisoners stumbled out into the freezing air. They looked around with wide eyes and saw nothing but endless white in all directions, jagged mountains in the distance, the ground under their feet cracking with ice, the wind cutting into their skin like knives. The voice of the hunt master came from the ship above, deep and cold, telling them the rules: survive until dawn. No weapons except what you find. No leaving the marked zone. The hunters are already here, and there will be no mercy for the weak. The voice faded into the storm, and silence returned except for the scream of the wind. Already the prey began to move. Some ran to find cover. Some formed small groups. Others roared and swore to fight the hunters head on. But the human did not move. He stood with his boots sinking into the snow, his breath misting in front of him, eyes still on the storm as if he was listening to it. The others glanced at him, wondering why he was still there, but then the first shadow passed through the snow, tall and thin, moving faster than any of them could run. And the first kill came. A lizard-like warrior tried to hide behind a block of ice, but the shadow struck him down with one swipe. The hunters were here. They were not men. They were taller than any man, covered in black armor that shone faintly in the light from the ship, glowing visors hiding their faces, weapons that looked like spears but hummed with energy. The snow around them turned red in seconds. The prisoners screamed. Some fought back, swinging claws or teeth or shards of broken ice. But the hunters moved with perfect skill, never missing a strike. The human finally moved, not with panic, not with fear, just a slow step forward into the wind. Then another, and another, walking straight into the storm, as if the cold and the danger meant nothing to him. One hunter noticed him and turned, visor locking on the small figure in the white. The hunter began to follow, his long legs covering the ground fast, snow spraying up with every step, but the human did not look back. The hunter raised his weapon, ready to strike, but then a strange thing happened. His visor flickered, static filled his comms, and for a moment his sensors went dark. When the feed cleared, the human was gone. The hunter stopped, scanning left and right. Nothing but white snow and screaming wind. He stepped forward again, but every step seemed to take him in circles. His visor showed strange shapes in the storm, too large to be the human, moving with the snow. He growled and spoke in his comms, saying he had lost the target, but the huntmaster only replied coldly, "Then find him." The human, meanwhile, was still walking, though no one could see him now, his coat flapping in the wind, the snow sticking to his hair, his boots crunching with each step. The storm was louder here, almost like voices whispering through the wind, but if they were words or just the sound of ice breaking far away, no one could tell. Back at the drop zone, more prey fell, one by one, their bodies left in the snow. The hunters moved in perfect lines, sweeping the area, but the human's trail had already vanished. No footprints, no heat, nothing. Some of the hunters began to talk quietly over private channels, saying the human was not worth the trouble. He was small, weak, slow compared to the others. But the huntmaster said no. The rules are clear. Every prey must be found. The hunters did not argue. They never did, but some of them could not stop glancing into the storm. One prisoner, a massive creature with skin like stone, saw the human go and thought he was crazy. He shouted after him, telling him there was no way to survive out there. that the storm would freeze his blood, but the human never turned around. The stone-skinned alien lasted only a few minutes more before a hunter cut him down, and the snow swallowed the sound. The human, meanwhile, walked deeper into the white, the cold biting into his hands and face, but his steps never slowed, his eyes stayed forward, like he was searching for something out there in the endless snow, or like something out there was waiting for him. The wind rose higher, and for a moment it seemed like shapes moved beside him, half hidden in the blowing snow. Tall shapes, moving silently. But when the snow shifted, they were gone. The human did not seem afraid. If anything, he looked calmer, as if the storm was a friend that he had not seen in a long time. Behind him, the hunters kept trying to track him, sending drones out into the blizzard. But each drone's signal vanished one after another, their lenses frosting over their engines, freezing solid. The prey who had been dropped with the human were almost all gone now, their screams fading into silence. The ground littered with dark shapes half buried in snow, and yet the human steps went on, always deeper into the blizzard, as if the hunt behind him was nothing but a faint memory already, and the world ahead, white and cold and endless, was where he truly belonged. The storm screamed louder now, like the whole sky was alive and angry. Snow fell so thick it was hard to tell where the ground ended and the clouds began. In that swirling white, the hunters moved like black shadows, their armor glowing faintly, their visors flashing with lines of strange symbols, each step leaving deep holes in the snow as they closed in on the last moving shapes of the prey. The first blood of the hunt had been spilled quickly, but it was only the beginning. The hunters liked to stretch the game, to make the prey believe they had a chance, and then tear that hope away. A creature with long silver claws tried to leap across a deep crack in the ice, thinking the hunters were too far to reach him. But a beam of blue light cut through the air and hit him mid-jump, his body twisting before falling into the darkness below. Another alien with 6 eyes and armor of its own tried to stand its ground, swinging a jagged piece of frozen rock like a club, but 2 hunters closed in from opposite sides, their movements fast and perfect, their spears cutting through the air in smooth arcs, and in seconds the snow drank more red. The human was no longer in sight of the killing ground. His steps had taken him far into the white wall of the storm. But one hunter was still tracking him, a tall figure with heavy plates on his shoulders, his voice low and steady over the comms as he said he had the trail. He pushed forward into the blizzard, the wind slamming into him so hard his armor groaned, snow stinging against the exposed parts of his armor joints. But the signal from his visor still pointed ahead, somewhere in the endless white. Through the swirling storm he caught a faint movement, a dark shape walking slowly, almost lazily. The human, the hunter, moved faster now, his breath loud inside his helmet, his fingers tightening on the spear. He was close enough to see the loose coat flapping in the wind, close enough to strike, but then his visor blinked, static flickering across the screen. For a moment the human was there, and the next moment he was not. The hunter froze, scanning the snow, turning in slow circles. His sensors showed false readings, heat signatures in every direction, shapes too large and too strange to be the human. His comms hissed and cracked, voices in the static whispering in a language he did not know. He backed up a step, then another, the wind pulling at him like hands trying to drag him deeper. But his orders were clear: find a prey. So he stepped forward again, and the storm seemed to close around him. The others on the comms heard his breathing grow fast, heard him mutter something about movement all around him, and then his voice cut off, replaced by a long burst of static that made even the most hardened hunter pause for a moment before continuing their work. Back at the center of the hunting zone, the number of living prey was falling fast. The hunters moved in tight groups now, their spears flashing, their boots crushing the ice. A 4-armed alien tried to flee across an open flat, but the snow beneath him gave way, and he fell screaming into a pit of jagged ice. Another alien with thick fur was running toward what he thought was safety, but from above a hunter dropped silently and drove a spear through his back, the sound lost under the howl of the wind. The human kept walking deeper, his boots sinking into the snow, the wind blasting ice into his face, but his steps never slowed. The cold that froze others in minutes seemed to slide off him. His eyes narrow and fixed on something only he could see in the white ahead. Shapes moved in the snow beside him now, tall and thin, their outlines shifting and breaking like smoke in a storm. They made no sound except for the soft crunch of snow under them. And though they were close enough to touch, the human did not turn to look at them. Instead, he walked as if he had been here many times before, as if this frozen place was not a death trap, but a road he knew well. The hunters who had stayed behind were uneasy. More than one looked toward the blizzard where the human had vanished, their voices low on private channels. Some spoke of old stories told in their home worlds, stories about storms that moved like living things, about creatures made of ice and wind that could take a person away and leave no trace. The hunt master dismissed it, saying storms were storms and prey was prey. But even his voice had a slight edge now. The human had been gone too long, and none of their trackers could find him. Another drone was sent into the storm, its engines whining as it cut through the air, its cameras turning left and right, catching glimpses of white nothing, then a shadow moving far away, the human. But before the drone could get closer, the shadow grew larger, towering, filling the frame with a shape that had no clear edges. The feed went black. The drone never returned. The hunt master growled an order for all hunters in range to close the gap, but those who stepped into the storm soon found the world bending around them, their compasses spinning, their sensors lying. The human was not running from them. He was pulling them deeper without even turning his head. One hunter swore he saw the human stop and look over his shoulder, his hood pulled low, his eyes glinting in the snow light. But before he could speak, the wind rose and swallowed the view. The next moment he was alone, his squad gone, their tracks already buried under fresh snow. He shouted into the comms, but no one answered. The storm's voice was the only reply. Somewhere far ahead, the human walked on, the whites stretching out forever in front of him, the shapes beside him now clearer, long limbs, bodies bent slightly forward, faces hidden by veils of snow, their movements smooth and silent. They did not follow. They walked with him, their steps matching his perfectly, and though no words passed between them, the human's face softened for the first time since he had been dropped here, as if he had finally come home. The storm had grown so wild that the sky and ground had become one endless sea of white. The air itself felt heavy, every gust carrying sharp needles of ice that bit into skin and metal alike. The hunters moved slower now, their black armor caked in frost, their glowing visors dulled by layers of frozen mist. They spoke less over the comms, their words short and tense. Each step into the deepening snow felt like stepping into another world, one without direction or light, one where sound was swallowed before it could reach another ear. In that blinding cold, the human kept walking, his coat hanging loose, his head bowed slightly, his breath rising in soft clouds that vanished as soon as they left his mouth. Far behind him, the remaining prey fought and fell, their deaths quick and silent. The hunters killed with no joy now, their minds split between the game they were trained to win and the strange pull of the storm ahead. It was not fear exactly, more like the weight of something they could not name pressing against their thoughts. The hunt master's voice came through the comms again, sharp and commanding, telling them to finish the game. Yet even he did not mention the human now, as if saying his name might somehow make the storm turn its eyes toward them. One hunter, smaller than the others but quick, broke away from his group, his visor catching faint traces of heat far into the blizzard. He thought it might be the human and moved faster, his boots crunching through drifts that swallowed him to the knees. The wind screamed around him, making his armor hum. Ahead he saw a faint figure, a shadow walking with steady steps, his grip on the spear tightened. He pushed forward until the shadow grew clear, the human. But there was something else too. Shapes walking beside him, tall, thin, almost touching his shoulders. The hunter slowed, unsure if he was seeing real forms or tricks of the snow. Then one of the shapes turned its head toward him, and his visor went black. Somewhere deep inside the storm, the human paused for the first time. He looked up, his hood shifting to reveal eyes that were not wide with fear but narrow with focus. The shapes beside him stopped as well, their limbs bending slightly in the wind. No faces visible, yet there was a sense of attention, like the storm itself had leaned closer. The humans seemed to listen, though no voice could be heard over the wind. Then he nodded once and began walking again, the shapes moving with him. The hunters tried again and again to find him, sending more drones, more signals, but every machine returned either frozen solid or not at all. One feed showed the human from far away, his small figure crossing an open plain of white, but as the camera zoomed, the snow rose like a living wave and blocked the view. When it cleared, the plain was empty. The hunt master cursed, his voice breaking for a moment before he regained control. He ordered a wider sweep, but the storm's borders seemed to move with the human, swallowing any who tried to close in. At the edges of the blizzard, the few surviving prey tried to run for safety, but the hunters were too skilled, their spears slicing through the snow like lightning. The last alien besides the human died with a roar that was carried away on the wind, leaving the human as the sole prey left alive. The hunt should have been over then, yet none of the hunters could claim the kill. The game was unfinished, the rules unbroken, yet impossible to complete. One squad pushed deeper, their leader determined to end it. They moved in a tight line, their visors locked on faint traces of movement ahead. The storm was so thick now, they could not see each other clearly even from a few steps away. Their leader raised a hand to halt them. A shadow moved just ahead. They crouched low, weapons ready. The leader signaled the attack, but before they could move, the ground shook under them. A deep rumble that came from beneath the snow. The drift split, a wall of white rising high, and for a second the leader thought it was just the wind. Then he saw the outlines inside it. Long limbs, twisting bodies, shapes as tall as the ship that had dropped them here. The squad broke formation without a word, their training shattered by something they could not fight. The human kept moving, his path slow but certain, his boots finding steps as if the snow itself was guiding him. The shapes beside him stayed close, sometimes fading into the white, sometimes almost clear enough to touch. They never spoke, yet there was a feeling in the air around them, a hum that seemed to pass through the human's body, through the ground, even through the wind. The blizzard no longer pushed against him but wrapped around him like a shield. Far above, the hunt master stood at the edge of the ship's bay doors, staring down into the storm, his eyes scanning for movement, his sensors useless. The human had turned the hunt into something else now. No longer prey, no longer target, something unknown. And the hunters were not trained for unknown. He ordered a retreat to regroup, his voice tight, but he knew even as he said it that the storm would not let them leave so easily. The white wall around the zone had grown higher, the winds faster, the blizzard now a living boundary that moved when the human moved. The squad leaders argued over the comms, their words sharp, some wanting to rush the storm with all they had, others saying to wait, that they had lost enough already. In the middle of the argument, a new sound came, low and deep, not the howl of wind or the crack of ice, but something else like the earth itself breathing. It came from everywhere at once, and every hunter froze where he stood. Even the hunt master's voice fell silent. Inside the heart of the storm, the human stopped again. The shapes halted beside him, their long limbs lowering slightly. The air grew still for just a moment, the snow hanging in place as if time itself had paused. The human looked ahead, and through the white a darker shape began to form, taller than the rest, moving slow and heavy. The other shapes stepped back, leaving the human standing alone. Yet there was no fear in his stance, only the quiet certainty of someone who had reached the place he was meant to be, and as the shadow loomed closer, the storm closed again around them, hiding them from every eye. The wind screamed so loud it felt like the whole world was breaking apart. The snow came down in walls that twisted and spun, hiding everything from sight. The hunters moved like blind men now, their visors flashing with warnings, their armor heavy with ice. Every breath they took burned their lungs with cold. The blizzard had swallowed the last of the open ground, leaving only an endless maze of white ridges and frozen valleys. Somewhere in that maze the human kept walking, his pace unchanged. the shapes beside him moving with the slow certainty of things that did not need to hurry, their outlines bending and shifting with the storm, sometimes tall and narrow, sometimes wide and low, yet always there in the corner of the eye. Far behind, the hunt master stood in the command bay of the ship, his claws gripping the rail as he watched the storm through the wide view screens. No map could track it now. The borders shifted every few breaths. The wind pushed against the ship itself, as if it wanted to pull it down. Every attempt to lock on to the human failed. Every signal returned broken or strange, some showing symbols that no hunter recognized. Others only static mixed with faint whispers. The crew muttered quietly. Some saying the human was no longer prey, that he had been taken by something older than the hunt itself. The hunt master silenced them with a glare, yet he could not stop his eyes from returning to the storm again and again. On the ground, a squad of 4 hunters moved through a narrow pass between jagged ice cliffs, their steps cautious, their weapons ready. The air here was so thick with frost they could barely see a body length ahead. One hunter raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. He had seen movement ahead, a figure stepping out from behind an ice wall. It was the human, standing still, his coat whipping in the wind, his hood low over his face. For a moment no one moved. Then the squad leader began to advance, the others fanning out. The snow crunched under their boots. The human turned his head slightly toward them, and then the pass filled with shadows. The shapes came from every side, sliding through the snow without sound, tall and thin, their limbs bending in ways that made the hunter's eyes ache to follow. No weapons in their hands, yet every hunter felt the same cold weight settle in his chest. The squad leader raised his spear, but before he could take another step the shapes were gone, the pass empty except for the human who was now walking away again, deeper into the white. The hunters stood frozen for a long moment before following. Yet no matter how far they pushed, the human stayed just ahead, always close enough to see, but too far to reach. Elsewhere, another hunter had taken position on a high ridge, hoping to catch the human from above. He lay flat against the ice, visor scanning the storm below. Through the blur of snow, he saw the human's trail, faint marks in the snow that wound between ridges. He followed them with his scope until they vanished into a strange hollow. There the snow moved in slow spirals, as if stirred by invisible hands. And from the center of the hollow, a shadow rose, taller than the ridges around it. The hunter blinked and the shadow was gone. The hollow empty, yet the trail did not come out the other side. The hunter reported what he saw, but his voice shook enough for the others to notice. The storm itself seemed to be growing teeth now, jagged spears of ice forming in mid-air and shattering in the wind. The hunters were forced to take cover behind thick walls of snow and frozen stone. Even their armor was beginning to crack under the strain. Still, the hunt master ordered them forward, his voice sharper than the wind. He would not allow one human to make a mockery of the hunt. But every step they took seemed to draw them further from their goal. The blizzard twisted their sense of distance. Places they thought were close took hours to reach, and when they did arrive, the human was never there. Only the soft marks of his passing, already fading under fresh snow. In the heart of the storm, the human stopped again. The shapes halted with him. The air here was different, warmer in a way, the wind softer though still loud. The ground under his boots felt more solid, as if he had stepped onto something alive that was letting him pass. He closed his eyes and listened. The sound of the storm shifted, no longer just the howl of wind, but a deep, slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. The shapes swayed slightly, their movements matching the rhythm. The human's lips moved, as if he spoke, though the wind carried no words. Then he opened his eyes and kept walking, the shapes following without pause. The hunters closest to him began to argue over the comms, some saying to turn back before they vanished like the others, others saying they were too close to give up. The voices rose until the hunt master cut them off with a single command to advance. Yet as they pushed forward, the storm thickened again, swallowing sound and sight. One by one their signals broke. The hunt master called to them, but no answer came. Only the low hum of the storm filling his ears. On the far edge of the hunting zone, one of the younger hunters stood alone, his squad gone, their tracks gone too. He could feel the storm pressing against him like a heavy hand. He turned to leave, but found the way behind him blocked by white walls taller than a ship. He turned again and saw the humans standing ahead, closer than before, the shapes all around him. The hunter's breath froze in his throat. The human tilted his head slightly, and the hunter felt something move through the air. Between them, a cold so deep it reached into his bones. He dropped his weapon without knowing why. His visor went dark, and the last thing he saw before the black took him was the human walking away again, the shapes bending close around him like guardians. Far above, the ship shuddered in the wind. The huntmaster's claws dug into the rail. The storm had grown so large it now reached far beyond the hunting zone, the edges curling like fingers around the land. He knew then that the game had changed in a way he could not control. Yet still he ordered his crew to watch, to wait, to follow the storm wherever it went, because the human was still inside it. And something told him that when the storm moved again, it would not be to flee, but to hunt. The blizzard had now grown into something so vast that it reached far beyond the hunting zone. The white wall of snow moved like a living thing, its edges curling and twisting as if searching for something to wrap around. Inside that wall, the hunters stumbled forward in small broken groups, their armor heavy with ice, their weapons coated in frost, their visors dim with constant interference. They spoke little now, every word stolen by the wind, every breath turning to crystal in the air. The human was somewhere ahead, always just out of reach, always walking with that same slow certainty, the shapes beside him never breaking step. The huntmaster stood in the command bay high above the storm, his claws gripping the rail so tight the metal bent. His eyes locked on the swirling white below. Every scan came back empty. Every tracker showed false readings. He had never lost sight of a target for this long, never had a prey turn the game into something else entirely. His crew kept glancing at him, waiting for new orders. But for the first time in many cycles, he did not know which command to give. The storm was not just hiding. The human, it was changing the ground itself, reshaping the hunt into a place they no longer understood. On the ground, a squad of 3 hunters pushed through a narrow, frozen canyon, the walls high and slick with ice. The wind funneled through the pass in long, steady bursts, carrying with it a sound that almost seemed like voices. The hunters ignored it, focusing on the faint heat reading ahead. The human, they turned a corner and saw him standing still at the far end of the pass, the shapes beside him flickering in and out of the snow like shadows caught in lightning. The squad leader signaled for the attack. They moved fast, boots crunching, weapons raised, but before they could close the gap, the snow under them shifted, cracking open like a mouth. The canyon floor dropped away and swallowed them whole. The human turned and walked on as the storm closed a gap behind him, the wind carrying no sound of the hunters below. Another group tried to circle around, moving across open ground where the snow was thinner. They thought they had found a weakness in the storm, but the air there began to shimmer, the temperature dropping so fast their breath froze in their throats. Ice crystals formed on their joints, locking their armor. One tried to raise his weapon, but the metal snapped in his hands. The shapes appeared around them then, tall and still, their heads tilting slightly. The hunters felt something pressing against their thoughts, a cold that was not in the air, but inside their minds. And then the shapes stepped forward, and the hunters were gone, their tracks already buried by fresh snow. The huntmaster cursed into the comms, ordering all surviving hunters to pull back to the outer edge of the storm. But the storm had no clear edge now. It wrapped around them in wide arcs, closing off paths they had used before. Some hunters who tried to leave found themselves walking in circles, returning to the same place over and over. Others simply vanished from the comms without a sound. The crew aboard the ship could only watch as their numbers dropped, their signals blinking out one by one. Deep inside the storm, the human walked across a plain of ice, so smooth it reflected the white sky above. The shapes around him moved slower here, their limbs trailing faint lines in the frost. In the reflection below, they seemed larger, taller, their forms stretching down into the ice like roots. The human looked ahead to a dark line on the horizon, the only thing in this endless white that was not snow. He adjusted his hood and kept moving toward it. the storm behind him folding and unfolding. Like waves on a frozen sea, one lone hunter, separated from his group, spotted the human crossing the plain. He began to follow, keeping low, his visor flickering with static but still showing the small figure ahead. The hunter thought he could close the gap before the storm noticed him. He moved faster, his boots sliding slightly on the ice, but then he looked down and saw his own reflection, and in that reflection the human was looking directly at him. Though on the ice above, the human had not turned. The hunter's breath caught, his chest tight. The shapes in the reflection turned toward him too, their limbs stretching, and the hunter stumbled back. His visor went black, and when it cleared he was lying in the snow alone, the human gone. The storm grew thicker around the human now, the wind bending away from him, wrapping the shapes in a swirling cloak. Far above, the ship's sensors picked up new patterns in the movement of the snow, long curved lines like the marks of claws dragging through the clouds. The crew stared at the readings in silence. The huntmaster said nothing, his eyes fixed on the screen, his mind turning over possibilities he did not want to believe. The human was no longer just surviving. He was part of whatever lived inside the storm. It was moving with him. On the far side of the hunting zone, a team of hunters finally broke free from the densest snow. They thought they had escaped. They could see open sky ahead, but as they stepped forward, the white closed again in front of them, a wall rising higher than their ship, the wind roaring so loud they could not hear each other's voices. The wall tilted forward, spilling down toward them like a wave. The hunters raised their weapons, but the wave hit them with crushing weight. When it passed, there was no sign they had ever been there. The huntmaster finally gave the order to retreat completely, pulling the ship higher into the sky. But the storm followed, its upper edges reaching toward the hull like long fingers. The crew worked fast to increase altitude, yet the readings showed the storm climbing with them. The huntmaster ordered weapons to fire into the white, beams of energy cutting through the clouds. But when the light faded, the storm was untouched, still swirling, still climbing, still hiding the human somewhere in its heart. Inside that heart, the human reached the dark line he had seen earlier, a crack in the ice stretching as far as he could see. The shapes stopped at its edge, swaying slightly. The human stepped forward and looked down into the deep shadow below. The sound of the wind here was different, lower, heavier, almost like the earth itself was breathing. He crouched, his hand brushing the ice, and the shadow seemed to lean closer, the storm folding in tight around them, hiding them completely from the world above. The huntmaster stood at the center of the command bay, his claws pressing into the console, as if he could force the readings to make sense, but every display only showed the same impossible data. The storm was no longer random. It was moving in deliberate spirals, bending around shapes the sensors could not identify, bending around something at its core. His crew whispered among themselves, their voices low, as if speaking louder might draw the storm closer. He ignored them, his eyes fixed on the shifting white patterns outside the wide viewport. Far below, the last scattered hunters were no longer hunting. They were running. The storm pressed on them from all sides, its walls curling in like the ribs of some vast living beast. The wind was no longer just cold. It carried weight, a crushing presence that slowed their steps and bent their backs. Every breath felt like pulling shards of glass into their lungs. The snow stung against their armor. The frost bit through their joints. The hunters fired into the white, but every shot vanished without sound or light, swallowed by the swirling wall. The human walked in the center of that white, his hood pulled low, his steps steady. The shapes around him were clearer now, their outlines sharp against the snow. They moved without touching the ground, their long limbs swaying slowly like branches in some silent current. They did not seem bound by the storm. They were the storm. The wind followed their movements. The snow fell in patterns that matched their steps, and the human walked among them, as if he had always belonged there. One hunter broke from the others and tried to flank the human, thinking the storm was weaker on the edge. But the moment he stepped outside the path, the white struck him like a hammer. The air went from cold to absolute nothingness. The sound in his ears faded to a long, deep hum, and then even that vanished. His visor went dark, and when he awoke, if he awoke at all, there was nothing left but snow. The hunt master barked orders to pull all hunters to the drop zone for extraction, but the comms were filled with static voices cutting in and out, the same short words repeated over and over like echoes in a cave. Some were calls for help, others were warnings, but they all ended the same way. In silence, the ship's crew tried to lock onto each signal, but each one blinked away before they could get a fix. The storm's edge was too close now, the white swirling high, enough to scrape against the lower hull. The human reached a place where the ice rose into jagged towers, their surfaces slick and dark like glass. The shapes moved among them, passing in and out of the stone without disturbing it. The human ran his hand across the frozen surface, and the tower responded with a low groan, the sound carrying far through the blizzard. The hunters who heard it felt it in their bones, a deep, slow vibration that seemed to push against their thoughts. One group tried to take cover among the towers, thinking the stone would shield them from the wind, but the shapes moved through the ice like water through cloth. The hunters found their weapons useless, their movements slow, their thoughts clouded by cold that seemed to reach inside them. One by one, they lowered their weapons, their eyes losing focus, and then they simply walked into the white without a word. From the ship, the hunt master could see the storm shift again, forming wide arcs that curved inward toward the jagged towers. The human was at the center of those arcs. Every movement he made sent ripples through the snow. The hunt master realized then, with a sinking weight in his chest, that the human was no longer prey. The hunt had turned, and now it was his hunters who were being driven. His crew looked to him for orders, but he said nothing, his eyes locked on that small figure in the white. The human stepped between two towers and found himself on a ledge overlooking a frozen lake. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the storm above, but in that reflection the shapes were larger, their limbs stretching high into the white, their eyes glowing faintly. The human knelt by the edge and placed his palm against the ice. The lake responded with a pulse like a heartbeat, and the storm above matched it in rhythm. The wind rose, then fell, then rose again. The shapes swayed to the same beat. A lone hunter who had followed at a distance now found himself standing at the edge of that lake. He raised his weapon, but in the reflection below, the human was already standing beside him, though in the real world the human had not moved. The hunter's hand began to tremble, his weapon lowering on its own. The shapes in the reflection leaned closer, their eyes locking on as the hunter felt his legs weaken, his vision blur, and then he too stepped forward into the white without resistance. The storm thickened into a single great spiral around the lake, its edges forming a wall so high it blotted out the sky from the ship. It looked like a vast white crown closing over the hunting zone. The crew could no longer see inside. Their scanners only showed a single pulsing point at the center. The huntmaster knew that point was the human, but there was nothing he could do. The storm was beyond his control. The human stood now at the very center of the frozen lake, the shapes around him in perfect stillness. The wind held its breath, the snow fell in slow drifting patterns, as if time itself had slowed. He lifted his head and looked toward the sky, toward the ship, though it was far beyond sight. The hunt master felt it like a weight pressing into his chest, as if those unseen eyes were staring through every layer of steel and air between them. For a long moment, nothing moved, the storm frozen in place, the ship silent, the hunters gone, and then the heartbeat from the lake came again, stronger this time. The storm answered with a deep rolling surge. The shapes rose taller, their forms stretching until they were nearly lost in the white. The human remained at the center, unmoving, but the air around him shimmered, as if the cold itself bent in his favor. The hunt master gripped the console, his claws biting into the metal. He understood. Now the hunt was over, and it was not the human who had been hunted from the start. It had been them, and the game had only ever belonged to the storm. The hunt master stood frozen in the command bay, the great white spiral filling every view screen. The storm pulsed with a slow heartbeat, each thud sending a vibration through the hull of the ship, as if the cold itself wanted to reach inside and take hold of every living thing. The crew whispered in fear, their voices thin and brittle. Some stepped back from their stations, as if more distance from the screens would keep the storm away, but the hunt master did not move. His eyes locked on the single pulsing point at the center of the white. Down in the heart of the spiral, the human stood on the frozen lake, the shapes around him now still as stone, their eyes like dim stars set deep within the swirling haze. The storm held its breath. The snow drifted like ash from far away. Fire, each flake falling without sound. The air was heavy, as if pressing in from every side. The human reached up, pulling back the hood of his coat. The pale light revealed a face marked by frost, but calm, as if the cold was an old friend. The lake beneath him was no longer smooth, its surface now cracked in wide arcs, each line glowing with faint blue light. The cracks stretched outward in patterns too perfect to be natural, like the veins of some vast, living heart. Beneath the ice, the glow pulsed in rhythm. With the storm, the human placed both hands on the ice, and the cracks brightened the light, rising in waves. The shapes surrounding him stepped closer, their limbs bending like the branches of great trees in windless air. On the ship, alarms began to sound. The scanners no longer showed any hunters alive. The signals had gone silent one by one, leaving only the human's pulse reading. But even that was wrong. The pulse was not beating like a human heart. It matched the storm's rhythm, slow, deep, and steady. The huntmaster's claws dug deeper into the console as he realized the truth. Whatever the human had found in the white had changed him, or perhaps it had been inside him all along, waiting for this place to wake it. The human looked down into the cracks, the glow beneath showing not just ice, but movement, something vast, shifting far below, as if the lake was a thin shell over an ocean that did not obey the laws of water. Shadows moved in that glow, long and fluid, their shapes older than the hunt, older than the cold itself. The human leaned closer and whispered words the wind carried away. But the lake seemed to hear. The glow flared, and the ice groaned like it was breathing. The shapes around him bent low, their heads dipping toward the lake, as if in respect. The storm walls rippled, the spiral tightening, the wind's voice deepening into a long, rolling tone. The ship above shook in the air currents, even though it floated high above the ground. The crew clung to their stations, their breath fogging the air. The huntmaster shouted orders to pull the ship higher, but the engines fought against the pull of the storm. The great white wall was no longer just weather, it was a force. The human straightened his back and stepped to the very center of the lake. The cracks widened beneath his feet, the glow rising brighter than the snowlight above. The shapes stepped back, giving him space, their eyes fixed on him. The human closed his eyes, and the glow surged upward through the ice, the light passing through him, as if his body was nothing more than a doorway. The storm answered with a deep roar that rolled across the frozen land like the voice of the world itself. The ship's hull rattled, panels shaking loose as the crew struggled to keep control. The huntmaster realized that the human was not calling the storm, he was becoming part of it. Or perhaps he always had been the prey, had not escaped the hunt. The prey had taken the hunt for its own. The hunters had been drawn into the white, not to kill, but to be erased, to be forgotten, swallowed by something that would not let their kind return. The glow burst upward from the lake, forming tall columns of light that pierced the spiral walls. The white swirled faster, wrapping tighter, until it was no longer many walls, but one great column reaching into the sky. The human's figure at its heart became a dark shape against the blinding light. The shapes of the storm bent low once more, then faded into the swirling brightness until they were gone. The human lifted his head once more toward the sky, and the ship's screens burned white for a moment, blinding the crew. When the light cleared, the spiral was gone. The frozen lake lay empty and unbroken, no sign of cracks or glow. The land around it was smooth, as if no hunters had ever walked there. The storm was gone, the air still, the snow falling in a lazy, gentle drift. The scanners showed nothing alive below, not even the human. The huntmaster stared at the empty white field, his throat dry, his claws aching from how tightly he gripped the console. He knew this place would not release them so easily. The crew waited for orders, but none came. The huntmaster's eyes remained fixed on the lake, his mind replaying the sight of that small dark figure standing in the center of so much power. The human had not fled into the blizzard. He had walked into something ancient, and it had claimed him, but in claiming him, it had taken everything else: the hunters, the storm, the ground itself, all bent to one will. A sound came through the comms, then faint at first like the whisper of wind across an empty plain. It grew clearer, not words, but a steady rhythm, the same deep, slow beat the storm had carried before. The crew froze as it filled the ship, the sound vibrating through metal and bone. The scanners still showed nothing outside, yet the rhythm was everywhere, inside the walls, inside their chests, as if the heartbeat of the frozen land had followed them. The huntmaster knew then that the hunt was not over. The human had not been lost. He had only changed sides. And now the storm walked where he walked. The white would find them no matter where they went. The crew looked to him with fear in their eyes, but he said nothing, for there was nothing left to say. The cold had chosen its champion, and it was not them.